had such a massive boom in varieties of startups and apps, which has been fantastic to see. But there's just not really enough work to go around for everyone. The market is only of a certain size, albeit it's a big market. The rate of new startups launching has really not slowed down, it's sped up. And I think we're now seeing a lot of consolidation. We're seeing some of the larger players, even some of the medium-sized players, acquire some of the smaller providers who've got a particularly niche product or a particularly good idea. And that's a double-edged sword, really. On the one hand, you risk missing out on the next big thing. It does stifle innovation a bit if you're being, gobbled up by larger providers. So you do potentially miss out on the next big thing. However, there's also a downside to having that kind of embarrassment of riches in choice. Law firms and corporates alike can struggle over which apps to invest in because there's such a range of choice. Option paralysis can set in sometimes, and you worry about picking the wrong product. So I think some degree of consolidation and having perhaps fewer but higher quality vendors and apps in the marketplace is where we're heading towards, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. I think what it means for the sector as a whole is that your data is not going to be siloed in 101 different places, potentially duplicated as well. You want to be able to seamlessly piece things together. And it's easier said than done, of course, because there is such a range of apps out there that if you've got, say, a DMS, say that you're a company like a NetDocuments or an iManage, you would love your data to be transferable to every app under the sun, but the reality is that there's a lot of work involved in even making a single connection. So you have to apply your time where it seems the market wants you to do it. And it's a challenge. It's a challenge to give your end users the flexibility they need, but it's also kind of a catch-up process because you've got to wait and see who are the emerging winners in the market, and that's who I've got to connect to. If you are an iManage or a NetDocument, etc., you can't possibly just try and connect to everybody. You've got to predict where the market is going for your customers in other areas of legal tech and other areas of technology in general, and then try and preempt it by having your data be able to move around. So it's difficult, but it's also essential. Otherwise, you end up stopping and starting your workflow and your process after each individual step, because you can't seamlessly move into the next step of your process. You've got to stop and export your data manually and put it back into something else, and it just kind of defeats the whole purpose. I think that's true, and I think the explosion in popularity of Teams and 365 over the last year and a half during lockdown and the pandemic has really proven that point. For better or worse, lawyers tend to live in the Microsoft Office environment. They tend to live in Word and Outlook. And yes, there's a lot of good reasons why maybe we should change that, but the reality is that's where they spend most of their time. So if you are going to start making your app or your software available to other apps in a data sharing kind of way, that's a very solid place to start, especially Teams. Of course, it has to make sense for your use case as well. There's no point having integrations for the sake of integrations. They have to actually add something useful to what you're trying to achieve. But we're seeing all kinds of apps now that do workflow scheduling, that do court diarizing, these kind of essential tasks, and the first thing they connect to is usually Teams or Office 365. When you've got tools available like Power Automate, for example, in the Microsoft suite, you just start to see what's possible out of the box, and some apps will talk to it natively without any additional configuration. They'll just talk to them. And once you start to see what's possible, automatically creating workflows, if I send an email to this person, automatically create this team and do this to it, that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's so much opportunity there to eliminate manual tasks, admin tasks. It doesn't have to be overly complicated. You just have to get started. And I think that starting with the very, very simple scheduling, project management tasks is where most lawyers should be looking at just now. And I think this is still such a wide range of things that are available there. It can be difficult to know where to start. You kind of got to pick and choose where you need that functionality versus whether it's a nice to have. For example, do you need your email client to be fully bespoke to yourself to how you operate? Probably not. Sending and receiving email is its core function. There's bells and whistles, of course, but at its core, that's what it does. So off-the-shelf products are most likely going to be okay. But then there are all kinds of client-facing applications that are very bespoke because that client's needs and requirements are very bespoke. So sometimes you do have to custom build to suit your particular requirements. And I think that we're seeing a really positive trend just now in the legal tech space where there are quite a lot of DIY type platforms that will allow you to do some of this customization work yourself. And I think all people have to really do is make that early assessment. Is off the shelf good enough? Does it achieve the majority of what we need here? Can we live with that? Will that work? And make that decision nice and early, or do you have to go bespoke? Do you have to either commission a professional to do this properly, or alternatively, with things that you can do now with no-code platforms, for example, do you have the resources yourself to have a go and see if you can create something in between? We are actually about to announce a new corporate consortium. So about 20 or so big names who are mostly in finance and technology. So most of these names, when they're announced, you'll recognize them. And that's been a recognition in the last few months in particular that the in-house community has many of the same challenges that private practice lawyers have, but very different resources and very different constraints. So the one-size-fits-all experience perhaps isn't right for them. So the point of the corporate consortium is for us to listen to the corporates and understand what needs to change, even things like the layout, the interface of the App Store. Do they need something different? And also the content, do we have the right things in the store that work for them? Because there will be some key differences there. So I think historically we haven't looked at the corporates particularly closely, but that is now changing. They have different demands on their time, different demands on their budgets. It would be great if they had their own innovation manager or similar to work with them. But as you say, that's very rarely the case. So giving them new options over and above just asking around. I mean, without a platform like Reynen Court, what the corporates tend to do is, if they can, go to the conferences, the tech events, the webinars, and they often don't have time to, and oftentimes they don't have the budget for the tickets, but if they can, they go to these things too. They also ask their lawyers, they ask their panel lawyers and try and get suggestions from them as to what they should look at. It's all very time consuming and it's all very stressful. So we're hoping by giving the corporates an alternative, they could do that as well as take a look at the curated content on the Reynen Court platform, and hopefully that will get them to pilots and POC much, much faster. Yes, there'll be a different experience there, and that's one of the questions that we're putting to the new consortium to help us understand that. We think most law firms are looking for a self-service model there. They have a good idea of what they're looking for. As long as our search taxonomy is accurate, they should be able to find what they're looking for with a few clicks on the store, and they find here are the curated apps that fit the use case that you're looking at. I think for the in-house community, they might be looking for a little more of an advisory position as well, rather than just self-service selection of apps and products available. I think they might be more interested in a sort of, maybe not full consultancy services, but something in that flavor where they might want just a bit of extra attention and help, more like a personal shopper, if that makes sense. Kind of help them along the journey and help them pick out what might be right for them. So it's still TBC at the moment, but I suspect that is something that the corporates will ask us for.